Last week I reflected on the question, who will roll the stone away, that the women asked as they went to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body, and also that it was not the empty tomb, but the presence of the risen Christ that was proof of the resurrection, and that Jesus is still present with each believer now. But today I want to dig a little deeper into that idea of the presence of Christ with us. The idea of God is with us. It's a concept explored by Sam Wells at the beginning of his book, The Nazareth Manifesto. Well, the idea of God being with us is not just about Jesus, about that period when he lived on earth among us, nor as he is with us now by his Holy Spirit. It's about the very nature of God, that it is God's nature to be with. John chapter 1 verses 1 to 3 tells us, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made." God was with himself in the beginning, Father, Son and Spirit in relationship. Creation occurred through this being with, as it says, without him nothing was made. God created the world and humankind to be with them. But as we know, that relationship, that being with, as God was with Adam and Eve in the garden, was disrupted. And as we go on in chapter 1 of John, in verse 14, we hear how God's Son Jesus came to be with humanity in another way. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. He moved into the neighbourhood, as the Message puts it. And this being with continues, as I said before, beyond Jesus' physical presence on earth. Jesus' last words, as we see in Matthew chapter 28, verse 20, are, "And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." Jesus is with us now through his Spirit, but that's not the end of the story. Revelation chapter 21 verse 3 tells us, "And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God.'" God's ultimate purpose is to be with us fully, dwelling among us, the relationship with humanity fully restored. Sam Wells says, "With is the most important word in the Bible, the word that describes the heart of God and the nature of God's purpose and identity for us." And it's not just the sense of with, it's also the idea of is in that phrase, God is with us. The idea of being, the idea of presence, not frenzied activity, not doing, but being. God is. We know this. We know that God calls himself I am. He tells Moses, "I am who I am." Jesus says the same thing. All those statements he made about himself, the I am sayings, as we call them, we have them as artwork around our building. They are statements about his identity as God. I am. God is. It's something to remember. God is. God is with. God is with us. What difference does it make to remember this every day? When have you perhaps experienced the presence of Jesus in a profound way? At Wednesday's prayer meeting, Angela shared a story from Open Doors about a man called Tea, who lived somewhere in the Middle East. One day the secret police called him home and arrested him on suspicion of being a Christian. It was a terrifying experience, but Tea wasn't alone. He says, "Right then and there, I felt Jesus beside me." Taya suffered ruthless interrogation, but he did not betray his fellow believers, and when released he continued to minister and evangelize. He says, "The time that I had with Jesus in prison was the real freedom for me." You know, when we know that God is with us, our perspective is totally changed. His presence becomes the reality by which other events around us are measured. I wonder, how does this understanding of God being with change our understanding of how we are to be as we're called to be like Jesus, like God? Learning to be with God, and learning to experience him being with us. And learning also to be with other people. Learning to dwell. The word dwell has a sense of time, doesn't it? A sense of resting, staying, being. So how do we learn to dwell with God in his presence? And how do we learn to dwell with other people? Not doing things for them or to them, not trying to fix them, just being with them, present to them, allowing them to be, and allowing them to experience God in us and God with them. Sadly, too many of our church family have experienced bereavement recently, and many are grieving in other ways. As I've seen people come alongside one another, one of the things I hear repeatedly is the assurance that it is okay not to be okay. The reassurance that a relationship, a meet for coffee, a walk is a place where each person can just be with the other, with whatever emotions they're experiencing at the time. So it's okay to weep, it's okay to laugh, it's okay to do both or to do neither. There is no pressure to put aside grief, no pressure to be done with grief, no pressure to do anything. There is just a space for people to be with each other and of course with God who is present. One thing I am keen that we might facilitate as a church is a Renew Wellbeing Cafe. This is a cafe space where it is okay to not be okay, where people, anybody, but perhaps particularly those who may experience poor mental health, can come and chat with others, perhaps do a puzzle or a craft, or just be quietly without interacting with others. As well as a cafe area, there's a prayer space where short times of reflective prayer are led periodically during the opening times. People can join in with these if they wish, or they could use the prayer space to sit quietly on their own. I think this pattern, though, is valuable beyond a wellbeing cafe. It's a pattern that we can use for life as church, as individual disciples called into God's mission of being with. A pattern where we are both present to God and to other people in all aspects of our life. Where we create spaces for people to be, where we don't try to do and fix, but we come alongside and dwell with people and invite them to experience God alongside us in the rhythms of prayer in our life. That is, in the way that we acknowledge the presence and the reality of God in our lives. That is why hospitality features so heavily in many church planting or missional contexts, as people gather in homes or community spaces to eat together, spend time together, to be together, and to recognise God is there amongst them. This is the way the good news of Jesus is spread, as God dwells among people. Well, gradually restrictions are lifting, and we can once again offer hospitality in our gardens and homes, or meeting in community spaces. I wonder, who will you invite? How might you meet and spend time with new people? How might you deepen your relationships with those you already know? How might you be more present to people, just being with them? And how might you invite people to experience God's presence? Or how might you share your own experience of God's presence? There is so much to think and pray about and ask God to lead us into as we follow his example and learn to be with. Let's reflect on God's presence now as we sing or listen to Be Still for the Presence of the Lord.